Howdy folks, welcome to another episode of the Scannell Agenda. Today's date is June 6th, 2017. This is show number 67, entitled Bay Scallop Ground, Sea Scallop Ground. Now when I was a young man, I had mentors. One of the mentors was a guy named Phil Schwind, and he wrote books, Cape Cod Fisherman. I think he wrote a book called Clam Shack Cookery. He wrote a book called, a book about aquaculture, which I gave away and I never should have. Wish I had it now. I got to get his collection back. I have one of his books, but I want to read them all again. Now he's an author, and he used to have lectures at the Saltmarsh Center down there in Eastham. And he was real salt of the earth. And if you read his books and you're a fisherman, you'd be well instructed to read up on his work. There's some others too. Belding, 1909, comes to mind. Okay, but Phil Schwind used to tell me, you know, you just have to get to work, you know, because I was a dreamer then as I am now, always scheming and planning, son of a planner. But I worked hard too. I mean, I worked like a dog. I was very well off in high school, had plenty of money, boats and cars and stuff. Now, Phil Schwind used to go flounder fishing with a net. That's an otter trawl. He dragged the ponds, or the salt ponds. And this was about cultivating the bottom ground, as he put it. In his book, I had lost it there, Practical Shellfish Farming by Phil Schwind. Great book. Now, you don't want your bottom to go get soured and to go south. And by that, I mean here inshore, I think historically we had such things like the sturgeon, and we had a lot of horseshoe crabs. I think they're coming back pretty good, which is good for the bottom because they churn things up. And when you churn up the bottom a little bit, you don't overdo it. I'm not talking about destruction, I'm just talking about some cultivation. There is a line that you can cross between cultivation and then you're getting into destruction. So I think if you're a savvy fisherman and you have common sense, you have a feel for what is cultivation and what is destruction, habitat destruction. So I've talked a lot about habitat destruction. But your bottom ground needs to be taken care of, let's say, like, okay, if you have some nice eelgrass dredges, some nice Nantucket Bay Scallop dredges, and you don't want to get dreadlocks in your eelgrass and let it go to hell, then you'll rake over it with the dredges, lightweight, comparatively lightweight Bay Scallop dredges are these Nantucket dredges, as opposed to the Cape dredge, which has a pressure plate, which I'm not really for using those. Not that I could ever get it right. Those are hard dredges to use too. But cultivation of your bottom ground is big, it's major. But you don't want to get into habitat destruction. So a guy named Phil Schwind, he knew the difference between the two, and he used to preach about it to me. I took his course on aquaculture. I think that was one of my first courses at Cape Cod Community College. I took a real estate course. How dumb am I? I got into the fisheries. And my dad was an expert in real estate. Anyway, so we got to cultivate the bottom ground, and to do that with bay scallops and sea scallops and lobster and flounder and everything else, we want to be careful that we don't want to be in the category of being sterile with the bottom. By that I mean we don't want to be in a category where we think everything is bad that we do. That wouldn't be true. A lot of the things that we do are bad, but a lot of the things that we can do to the bottom when we're fishing are actually good. Another guy here who I worked for on the Janet and Jean, Captain Rene Botero, he used to do sea clamming and dredging with the jets, okay, that would get into the bottom. And he explained to me, and it didn't take a genius to get it, I was open to it, okay, that if you take some hard, sour bottom that usually should have some good quahogs in it, let's say ocean quahogs, and you go through and you rip it up, well, then you're going to come back a year or two later and find that area to be, instead of being dead bottom and just very sour bottom, it would be very productive bottom. So this is really what we got to keep in mind. We want to cultivate the bottom ground, but we don't want the rocks on the bottom on George's Bank to be showing like a monk with a bald head and hair along the edges, you know, like St. Francis of Assisi. Now, a lot of the divers in the old days, they would say the rocks out there on George's Bank and in the Scallop areas have been just knocked, everything, all the life is knocked off the top of the rocks, and around, let's say my head were a rock, around the edges would be your seaweed and growth, and then on top of the rock would be bald. It would be totally worn out. So when we are fishing bay scallops on Nantucket, if we're wise, or on the Cape, we want to use the right equipment, and you want to cultivate the bottom ground, and I would recommend this for Bass River. I know there's a new organization forming up called Friends of Bass River. Probably the right thing to do with Bass River and a lot of these places would be to get your mooring system such that you can get in there with bay scallop dredges. And even if there's nothing to catch there, you want to be cultivating that bottom ground. You want to be towing around up in Fallon's Pond, up on all the grounds that were the bay scallop grounds for Bass River. So if you don't want to get dreadlocks, you know, you comb your hair, right? You comb your hair and you keep your scalp healthy. You go to the barber, take a shower once in a great while, keep it somewhat clean. Same is true with the bottom, with the eelgrass. And the same is true offshore with sea scallops. You get your bottom ground, you got to tend to your bottom ground, you got to cultivate it, and you don't want to destroy it. A friend of mine on the vineyard who gave me a tour of the vineyard, his name's Mike Picandra. I don't know, I haven't talked to him in years, either one of these guys. I know Phil Schwind has passed away. Rennie, I don't know where he is, if he's alive or dead, but Mike Picandra, he's a young guy like me. And he gave me a tour since I was from the Nantucket Marine Laboratory. I got the Royal Tour years ago of the vineyard, and I talked to a lot of people out there. And he explained to me that he took sea scallop gear in Cape Pogue Bay, which is bay scallop grounds, and it was 2 seasons later that was thick with bay scallops. It's because it needed to get roughed up. Mike knew it. Probably a lot of other people knew it, and he did what needed to be done. You couldn't probably get a permit to do that, but he did it. You know, as they say, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. So a lot of these little areas, Walkwhite Bay, Pleasant Bay, areas that haven't been towed for a while with the bay scallop dredges, they need to be gotten after. You need to comb your hair, you need to get in there with the bay scallop dredges and cultivate the bottom ground. You don't want sour bottom. So out offshore with the sea scallops, I think, let's talk about Cape Cod Bay or Massachusetts Bay right here. I was told that there was a rim of which you used to get the the sea scallops there. You could make a good day's pay fishing the sea scallops in Cape Cod Bay if you fish the rim. Now, I don't think there's much in there now, but we could make it happen again. And the first thing that I would say to do would be to get in there and tow and rough up the bottom a little bit, get it worked a little bit, and then start introducing your seed scallops, sea scallops, and just populate some areas with the sea scallops in Cape Cod Bay. Now you do that with the market quota system, and you'd have a diver industry mainly. Secondarily, you would have the kinder, gentler dredges going after the sea scallops, because you don't want bottom destruction. You want to cultivate somewhat, but you don't want to go overboard. And then you'd want to have good stewardship, and you'd want to say, okay, let's see, have we caught about 70% of what we should be catching? And then you say, fine, let's leave it at that. Go home, hang up the dredges, leave it alone, try it next year. Now with the bay scallops, you generally don't have a seasonal nature, winter, spring, summer, fall, but with the bay scallops you do fish in the fall from October if you're non-commercial, and then November if you're commercial. Then you fish all the way through, if there's still scallops, the month of March. That's how it was on Nantucket. And sometimes they'd leave it open partially to get into April if the scallops were still heavy on Nantucket. So that was kind of before my time. Anyway, judicious use of your equipment, the right knowledge and technique when it comes to shutting the beds down when it's time, and then cultivating the beds with the right gear. Even if there's no scallops there, like I said, in Bass River, we should be getting in there and towing. I would tow a spread of 10 dredges with a good size outboard, maybe on an outgoing tide, and just get in there, find out, delineate the beds, and then you tow through the beds with gear that's not too destructive, but yet not too gentle either. All right, and then you're going to be more conducive if you were lucky enough to get some seed. Then you would be in a good position to repopulate Bass River with bay scallops, as opposed to trying oysters. Let's try oysters. Well, it's not oyster ground. Some of it might be oyster ground, but you want to go with what kind of ground are we talking about? Let's just say for Witchmere Harbor, what ground is that? That's good oyster ground in there. But for bay scallops, I wouldn't think so much it would be good for bay scallops, but I could be wrong. It could be that in years past they did bay scallop in Witchmere Harbor. But you need your mooring systems to be congruent with the fishery too. And I have been working on mooring system philosophy, let's say, that contributes to the public resources of the fisheries. All right, another project I have is to start good bay scallop ground right at Bank Street Beach, and then work east and west from there. Now, to do that, you'd have to have the knowledge that you're working on potentially good ground. So you might want to have some strategic dredging of sand to get the eelgrass that you're going to plant and cultivate at a depth where it makes sense. Now, this is somewhat of a sticking point for your classic left-wing environmentalist that I've had problems with at Sacajah Pond. They don't want to infringe on Mother Nature. And a lot of this stuff I'm talking about, it might seem like, oh, yeah, right, let's not step on Mother Nature's toes, but sometimes you got to get rough if it's kind of like hip surgery. To fix a problem, sometimes the right thing to do is to re-engineer totally some bottom ground that you do have. So for the Harwich Port area, there were some scallops out there, so I know that it's got some natural eelgrass in that area. But in order for the eelgrass to take and spread, it's got to be at a proper depth because it'll get washed out with the waves. And also you need to protect it if you do plant it with what I call the tire reef or mussel reefs that are of my design, which I've been working on since I was 18, as I've said. So if we take a garden club of the Sea Farm and we give people squares of a garden to sponsor, and then we have outside, we have our prisoners down on the border zone working on our tire reefs, and people here in every, we have a lot of depressed communities. My wife and I took a ride through Brockton the other day, and there's all kinds of land and area there to do these projects. But the point is, with the market quota system, these are productive projects that I have on the table, because if you take a portion of the proceeds, the profits from the landings, fishery landings, and then you reinvest it, the public reinvests it, not the fishermen, back into the resources, well then what you've got is a cash flow system that will work, and it will expand and make more pie, as I say. Will make more fisheries production. Now, to make more fisheries production for the bay scallop ground would be to get into eelgrass cultivation, which I've been into all my life as a study, and I've got a lot of machines designed that'll do that. Now, the corollary for sea scallops might be to plant kelp, and I've got machines and systems for that too. So now, here then, what are we talking about? We're talking about money, income, cash flow. We're talking about eelgrass, engineering the eelgrass beds, giving ourselves good ground, knowing when to get in there and rip up a little bit, not too much, and knowing when you have a sour bottom. That's all very important stuff. Now, a cranberry bog is such a thing as an eelgrass bed. If we engineered the eelgrass bed, it would more or less be like a cranberry bog. And we would then get production, as we do, from a cranberry bog. In Carver, they're building new bogs. Out here, in Harwich, we're letting them go. I don't like it. I need a drink. It's good cranberry juice. Ocean Spray. Original. Great stuff. Good for you. So we need to build up the biomass tonnage, and then seafood will be landed in great tonnage, 10 minutes. Now, in order to do that down in Harwich Port, what we want to do would be to dredge strategically, and I've got my opinions, but we'd all have to get together. And then on the main breaking bar, which is a sandbar out there a couple 100 yards, we'd have to put wave breaks on that so that when we plant fresh eelgrass clumps and get it to spread, get it to become a good eelgrass bed productive of scallops, well, you don't want a good blow coming in and tearing all the eelgrass out. So there are two things, the mussel reef or the tire reef, and then, your depth. And then you plant your scallop vines, which is the eelgrass. And once you have your eelgrass planted, well then you might just be able to leave it alone. But with these super hatcheries that I've got in design, and I did a show on warp speed hatcheries, my God, the money from bay scallops is phenomenal right now. It's a huge income. So from a money standpoint, from a businessman's perspective or an accountant or a banker, you do the market quota system. You would set up a cash flow system for the natural resources, of which I'm known for in small circles. Years ago I was known for it, and that is the market quota system, the sea farm. So with the expansion and the engineering, the University of New Hampshire was very good at this, and they did a lot of work. You know, they have 18 miles of coastline, they say. Okay. That was their specialty. Now, the University of Rhode Island might specialize in something else, and the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth might specialize in some other things. So we all come together. We have workers. We make the gear. We make the equipment. Primarily, the most important thing is to know that with a cash flow system, you're going to be making money. And you're going to be able to justify putting people to work who aren't working. We're standing around looking around. Why aren't we working? We're not working because we don't have a good fisheries system. We have a fisheries system that is, for all purposes, it was a lottery that some people won. Basically, they were in the right place in the right time in history. And they got to take away the permit value, which is like a real estate deed. It was really the wrong way to go, and I opposed it. And I've been mad about it for years and years and years, but I've been putting good ideas on the table too. It's one thing to be mad. A lot of people are mad possibly because we don't have codfish, we don't have scallops. But it's another thing to do the work and do the planning and to put the ideas on the table, such as blue economy brainstorming, and say to the county of Barnstable, this is what we need to do. We need county dredges that will operate for the benefit of eelgrass. We need county dredges that will put a mile of sand outside Nauset Beach with salt ponds and harbors. We need county dredges that will be autonomous. This is all my stuff. And that will be unmanned and get their power from not a diesel engine, from the waves and the wind. So we need to move in some direction that makes sense. And right now we are basically suffering with a servility, as I've mentioned, to the rich. And as to protecting the waterfront areas for the rich, I will say I don't approve of that. I believe in aesthetics, and I once designed a beautiful little upweller unit that had a scoop in front for Nantucket, and it looked like a fine yacht, of which at the time I was a boat builder, and we built fine yachts. And I said, what's wrong with this? It'll make the rich people happy. They don't like looking at slabs of ugly plywood right in front of their beautiful homes. And beautiful boat, piece of junk, upweller. I think in Provincetown it was then flying neutrinos or something. I forget what that was. That's horrible. It's hideous. I don't go along with that, but I also don't go along with no industry. The industry's got to be aesthetic. It's got to look good. No reason why it can't look good. So, we have to be cognizant of good base scallop ground, what it was, what it is. We have to know that we were wiped out in the 1930s, early 30s, 1930 and 31. We had the wasting disease. The eelgrass was 95% wiped out in Europe and here on the East Coast. It was just wiped out. And I've known people that have schooled me in how it was. These are old timers that are gone now. And they taught me all I could absorb because they knew I was a sponge. Well, we got to get on this eelgrass thing if we want to make money. If you want the Cape Cod's economy to hum, you've got to have good fisheries programs, good mooring programs, good dredge programs from the county level that could administer with the towns and the state and the federal government some of these projects. We're standing around looking at each other. That's what we're doing. and it's not healthy. You know, you got to say at one point or another, this attitude that we've had about what the fishermen want to do, what do the fishermen want to do, you got to say at one point or another, that's got to go. And you got to also tell the people that push this kind of thing, look, you know, we need some codfish. We need some scallops. We need to say to the fishermen and to the public, what do we got to do to get a production system here? What is entailed with getting a sea farm going that will be productive, millions and millions of dollars every year for Cape Cod, like it should be and was. And we can even go one better. We can even go one better because we can engineer such that Mother Nature would be in a zone, 2 minutes, of nirvana. Because with a little bit of thinking, we can design the gear that's going to plant the eelgrass. We can design the gear that's then going to seed the beds with scallops. And we have the people that know, that can look at the stock on Red River Beach and look at the stock on Calmus Beach and say, this stock is stunted. And you got to do better than that. You can't expect scallops to produce that are genetically stunted. In other words, that I've said this before many times, if your scallops all look the same, they're all brothers and sisters, and that doesn't go. And I mentioned a story about the Scannell bushel proposal that I had on Nantucket to bring scallops to, bring wild seed scallops to one area, let's say per year, working with federal and state, make it worth our while on Nantucket, but jumpstart the fishery with the full stock, thank you, of scallops. So there's money in this stuff, folks. There's money in smartening up with fisheries. There's money in smartening up with the social services work that I do. It's all attached to a prosperous economy, as I look at it. And the border zone issue that's big money, because they can be working on all the gear down there on the border zone. It can be a manufacturing hotbed for us for projects such as fisheries and aquaculture, public aquaculture. So we need a return to common sense in fisheries. Years ago in Harwich, they did used to lease the runs. So that's it for today, folks. That's the Scannell Agenda. Thanks for watching.